All right. Afternoon. We're going to talk about scaling security in Agile Scrum today. Hopefully you guys can hear me in the back. If not, just kind of raise your hand or something. So over the past few years, there's been a major increase in the use of Agile methodology for software development. And that shift has made it more challenging for security teams to keep up, especially when you compare it to traditional models like waterfall. Agile means increased speed, it means lower latency, which leads to some resource constraints on the part of security teams. The risk of shipping insecure product is elevated because suddenly you're not able to inspect thoroughly enough. And the good news is that security can work within Agile. It can be done well, it can be done without having to allocate a lot of full-time security experts to development teams, which is great. It does require some flexibility on your part. So this is kind of a case study. And as I go through this case study, what I'd like you to do is to listen to how our process has evolved. This is all based on things that we do internally at Veracode. And then envision how you could maybe apply some of our learnings to your own Agile dev teams back at home. My hope is that you'll take away three things from this. Number one, learn from our successes and mistakes. Number two, improve your ability to ship secure software developed within Agile frameworks. And number three, make your relationship with dev teams less adversarial and more of a partnership. So by way of introduction, my name is Chris A. I lead the research team at Veracode. I'm responsible for building security knowledge into our products, and I also share accountability for product security with our CISO. I spent most of the first part of my career doing offense, so pen testing and breaking stuff, before coming to Veracode to focus more on the defensive side. So when development switches to Agile, a lot of times what happens is security teams get left behind. You may not realize, if you're not closely intertwined with your dev teams, you may not realize that they're even doing Scrum. You may just get a product increment at some point that they want to release and they say, hey, can you test this before we release it? So if you don't adjust and understand how the development process works, it's going to be very difficult for you to stay up to date with what's going on. There's an information needs survey that was released about a month ago. It's called the App Dev Priority Survey. And they surveyed about 530 organizations about how they're doing various different parts of their development process. And one of them asked about Agile. And so currently they found that 69% of organizations are using Agile, and another 13% plan to implement some form of Agile within the next 12 to 24 months. So you can add that together and figure out that that's mostly all of them. So everyone's doing Agile just about to some extent. Whether it's full-on Agile Scrum or just kind of Agile-like methodologies, it's close enough. In the same survey, 76% of companies said that Agile either slightly or majorly improves their development timelines. So it makes them more productive, it makes them work faster, more effectively, and so you can see that's why they're motivated to do that from a development point of view. And from a security point of view, there are a couple models out there that suggest how to do security within Agile, but they're kind of generic. If you Google it, you'll find one from Microsoft. It says security in the Agile SDL. And it's a good start. But the problem with it and any sort of best practices methodology is that it's a generic approach. It makes some assumptions about your security resourcing. The expertise on your team kind of assumes that you have unlimited resources, bandwidth. It glosses over a lot of real-world complexities. For example, having multiple Scrum teams working on a single product, which is fairly common. It doesn't really talk about that very much. So that's why I thought it was important to approach this topic from the perspective of a case study. So we have all this kind of real-world, here are the actual things that we ran into as we were trying to do this, starting from a generic model. So I'm going to walk you through how our SDL has evolved over the past 3 to 4 years since we made the move to Agile Scrum. I'll go through a few phases about some things that we tried and that didn't work for various reasons, just to kind of have the context for that. And then we'll talk about how we're currently, over the past year, we've scaled that out, made that something that gets pushed down into the individual Scrum teams themselves using a program that we call the Security Champions. And I'll end with a discussion of challenges and future direction and some specific takeaways and learnings that will hopefully be useful to you. It's really weird for me standing in one place. Like normally I'd be wandering, but like standing here. Anyway, so several years ago, about 4 years ago now at Verico, we decided to start using Agile Scrum. And from early on in the company, we said we were using Agile, but we really weren't. We would write user stories, but our sprints would be anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. We would miss release dates by like a month at a time. I mean, this is not Scrum. Okay? So there were a few reasons why we decided, all right, we need to go full on, we need to actually do this for real. So we were at a stage in the company where we were evolving from a single product to a multi-product, single team to multi-team, single site to multi-site. So we needed to become more scalable, we needed to become more predictable and more mature as an organization. And also we like the notion of continuous learning that comes with Agile, that you're constantly reevaluating and assessing what you're doing, what's going well, what's going poorly, and where you can improve. And we like that. We were in a period of aggressive growth, hiring lots of engineers, and one of the nice things about using Scrum is it's a well-defined methodology for building software. And so when we would bring lots of new developers on from other companies, we'd have to ramp them up on our product, but we didn't have to ramp them up on how we built software. They already knew how Scrum works, if we hired correctly, obviously. So they understand the processes and the operational stuff, and they just needed to ramp up on the project. The last thing I want to point out in terms of the motivation to move to Scrum is it was completely driven by development teams, right? There was no regard for, like, oh, should we move to Scrum? Does it affect security at all? Maybe they won't like that. No, of course not. So it's not meant to be pointed out as a negative so much as it's an observation. Security teams have to adapt to the way the business wanted to build software. It wasn't necessary for them to ask us what we thought about it. It's our responsibility to learn it and understand how it will affect us, but purely driven by development methodologies. Okay, so just quick show of hands. Who uses Agile Scrum today? Okay, we've got about half. That's pretty typical. Developers in the room? Okay, a little bit more than average. Okay, so I don't want to give you all the background on Agile Scrum. You can go read that on your own. I am going to use a few terms throughout, so I'm going to very quickly define just the very basics of what you need to know, so I can talk about what we're doing in some depth. So a few definitions, I'll sprinkle them throughout. First thing, Scrum ceremonies. All right, so you'll see different icons through the slides that kind of represent different parts of Scrum, right? So the cards represent the sprint planning process. And that's where you kind of have a meeting, you define the work to be done during the sprint, the team chooses how much work it can commit to, and you go from there. So every iteration, you do a planning cycle. The calendar represents a daily Scrum, which is when you go and you get together in a room with people, you stand up, you talk about, what did you do yesterday, what am I going to do today, where am I blocked, and can we swarm on something? So that's a daily Scrum meeting. The review demo meeting is when, at the end of a sprint, you get together, you say, hey, here's all the cool stuff we've done, let me show off what I've done in my user stories, and you just, you evaluate the changes that you've made to the product within that time frame. And finally, the retro is a point where you, as a team, get together, you reflect on the process, and you think about what went well this sprint, what went poorly, and what can we improve on. Sometimes the review and the demo and the retro are combined into a single meeting. These meetings are not supposed to last a long time. A review is supposed to be an hour max, and the retro is supposed to be about 45 minutes per week of sprint. So these are short things. So this happens every sprint, and sprint is the iteration, the cycle, the unit of measure for Scrum. All right, so when we first started, okay, they're moving to Agile Scrum, what should we do? So the first thing we did was well, crap, we need to know what is going on in development. We need to understand what stories they're building, what they're taking in, what they're committing to, so that we know what needs to be tested, right? Pretty simple. We can't just wait till the end and say, oh, let's just do a pen test. We needed to look at the individual stories that they were committing to and figuring out, all right, well, does this need a code review? Does this need a design consultation with a security expert? Does this need a little miniature pen test for this particular feature that's super important and has security critical functionality? So what we would do is we just started going to their planning meeting. So for this particular team, it was every 2 weeks, they'd have a 2-hour planning meeting where they would go through, they'd pull stuff into that particular sprint, and that was what they would code up for that sprint. So we would sit there and we would listen and say, oh, that sounds like it's security related, or that doesn't sound like it's security related, and just kind of make a note of what needed to be added to that particular story. So adding a new GSP page, somebody might say, all right, well, we need to do a code review of that, and we need to make sure that the developer understands what process we're doing. Like, so very informal. We didn't create stories for that. We just kind of kept track of what needed to be done where, and then tap the developer on the shoulder and said, hey, when you're done with that, let me know. So, pretty informal at this point. Now I'm going to evaluate what we were doing in the style that you would do in a retro. So during this kind of phase in our life cycle, here's what was working. So we had increased visibility. We knew what stories were going in. We were aware of more stuff. We had security subject matter experts reviewing the result of automated scans, which seems obvious, but up until then, we were using our own products and other products to do scanning of the product, but the developers were reviewing the results and making the fixes. And so we said, well, we should probably get a loop on that. This is a long time ago. And then we were more closely aligned with the developers' lifecycle, working within their sprints. Was there a question there? Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, how big is the team? Do you mean my team or the engineering team? So my team specifically is 8 researchers, and we're mostly, but keep in mind that we're responsible for building functionality in the product. Nobody was hired to work on product security. So basically, at this point, we were working with, like a quarter of one person to do the stuff that we were doing in this phase. What was bad for us here is that we were not using that particular time very efficiently. So I mentioned, he's sitting there in this 2-hour meeting, just kind of listening, his ears perking up when there was something that we needed to do. But you might sit there for 30 minutes listening to stories that have nothing to do with security. It's like, what a waste of time. So what we thought we needed to change here was like, how do we figure out how to use time more efficiently? How do we, drop you in exactly how we need you and not have you sitting here listening to stuff that doesn't really matter to security? Okay, more definitions. So in Scrum, you have a thing called a product backlog, and that represents all development stories for a given product, all the stuff that you're eventually going to build or that you had an idea to build. The idea is that it's ranked in priority, so it's groomed in terms of what's most important. So that's why at the top of the bookshelf, you've got things like nice orderly fashion. As you move towards the bottom, you have things kind of haphazard. They may not have been prioritized yet. But you have this list, this world of user stories that correspond to what you're going to eventually build. Your sprint backlog, which is this little pile of books here, is the stories the team is committed to completing during a sprint. So during that 2-week period, this is the chunk of work that we've bitten off that we're going to do. And then finally, the product increment, stuff in the box, is what's shippable at the end of the sprint. So by Scrum definitions, at the end of every sprint, you're supposed to have a shippable product. That's it. You have to have acceptance criteria, you have to have a definition of done, but your product should be shippable. Okay, so as we're going from this first phase where we're kind of just sitting there wasting a lot of time and identifying what we should be working on, in the meantime, the development teams did a few things to us that we didn't account for. Number one, they took one huge Scrum team, they split it into 3 Scrum teams. Great. So that's, on the surface, 3 times more meetings. Not great. They did that because they weren't adhering to Scrum rules, which says you have to be 7 plus or minus 2 people for a Scrum team, and at this point they were like 18, 20 people in the Scrum team. So that wasn't correct. So they split into different Scrum teams. I think this was around the point where we also actually added, we were switching technology stacks from like Rally to Jira. We were doing a bunch of things that just like created a lot of hassle. We just had to kind of be aware of that and roll with it. Okay, so in phase 2, now you can see we've got 3 different Scrum teams for this particular part of the product, right? And we're trying to use our time more effectively. So what we started doing is we said, let's not sit in on that planning meeting. That's too much time. Let's meet with the tech lead for that particular Scrum team, which could be the Scrum Master, could be the dev lead. There's not a strict definition there. Let's meet with them afterwards and just go through all the stuff that they committed to, like really quickly. And we'll just go down the list and like bam, bam, bam. If there's clearly no security impact, we'll just not talk about it. We don't need to know what it was designed for, what the customer needed. If there's not a security impact, we'll just skip over it. And so what that led to is like we could get through all this in like 20 or 30 minutes instead of 2 hours. Downside is we had to do it for 3 different teams now. But still, we were coming out ahead. We were using our time better, and we were actually creating real stories in Jira and attaching them to the main story. So we were creating essentially a subtask, attaching it to the story, and that way you couldn't close out the story until you also close out the security subtask. The subtask could be do a static analysis, it could be do a code review. Code reviews, I don't know if you can see that, but anyone who's done a code review kind of knows why it's a crying face. And it could be anything. It could be any sort of security activity. And that tied it much better into the way that they were using the tools, and and they already knew. The dev teams already know if you don't close out a story unless you finish all the subtasks. Right? So that was good. So this phase, we're like, all right, cool. More effective use of our researchers' time. Developers were starting to kind of get it. They were kind of reaching out to us with questions, which was nice. And then, there was a flexibility issue. We were able to continue working with the dev teams during this period of change. Like I mentioned, the team split, the tool split, things that were changing from a developer perspective. We were able to continue helping out those teams and staying integrated. What was bad? Okay, well, obviously because the team split, I mentioned there was an increased time commitment that we had. So, multiply everything by 3, even though we were decreasing the commitment to each team. We were violating Scrum still by changing stories during the sprint. So, if we go back and I describe again what we were doing, the Scrum team would meet on their own. They do their planning. They take in their work, and then we would meet with them afterwards, figure out which things needed security work, and add work to each story, which is a big no, like in Scrum. If you don't change the amount of... Now, we weren't adding work for them, we were adding work for us, so sort of okay, but still you're not supposed to do that. So that was bad. And then also at this point, we created sort of a single point of failure by virtue of the fact that I had one person that I had kind of designated to go to all these meetings and do the security tasking and do the reviews. And, that made it hard for him to go on vacation. So what do we need to change? We need to move earlier in the pre-sprint planning activities into the grooming phase so that we weren't adding work after the sprint. And then also we needed to find a way to distribute the workload among the other people in the team so that we didn't have a single point of failure. Another thing that was worth pointing out here, I can't remember exactly when this happened, so I didn't put it on the slide, but at one point, the development organization had some training company come in to do Scrum Master training for all the, we had probably about 10 different Scrum teams at this point. I'm only focusing on a subset of that here. But they said, all right, we're going to send all these developers to Scrum Master training so they know, exactly how the thing works and they speak the same language. So I sent 2 people from the security team to that as well. Because, why not? You learn the vocabulary, you learn how, the sausage is made. You're on the same page with the engineers, and, that can't hurt, and it costs 2 days of their time, so. And they got certified. Okay, more definitions, fun. In Scrum, we have a couple different roles. We have product owner. You can tell he's a product owner because he's wearing a suit. He is responsible, or she is responsible for prioritization. That person has a single interface to stakeholders. Stakeholders can be management, can be customers, all the people asking for stuff. Hey, build me this feature, build me this capability. Product owner does that. And says what's important, what can I hold off 3 quarters on, what is going to make me lose a customer if I don't do it today, that sort of thing. The Scrum Master has an internal focus on the team and the process. It's not allowed for the product owner and the Scrum Master to be the same person. The Scrum Master is like running, it's making sure the trainers run on time, calling the meetings, making sure people don't go into rat holes, just kind of cracking the whip. And the team is everyone else. Everyone else on the Scrum team is doing the work. This can be developers, QA testers, DBAs, UX people. It's self-organizing. It can be 7 people plus or minus 2, which I mentioned before, but other than that, it can be kind of comprised of anybody that is doing work that's going towards the product. So after Ryan, my product security guy, went to Scrum Master training, he came back and said, hey, we actually have very similar roles to this on the security team if you think about the things that we do. A product owner is, on the Scrum side, is sort of the same thing as our security architect, which is the person that's strategic, they're closely involved in the planning, they're the one that's kind of saying like where security activities need to be added and looking at the backlog. The team member on the Scrum team is very similar to what we would call a security engineer, for lack of a better word. And that sort of person is more tactical. They're not tightly coupled with any particular team. They take little chunks of work like, hey, code review this page, or go consult with this developer on how to do crypto correctly. But they're taking very tactical pieces of work in the same way that a Scrum team member takes a story in. So we started, we just kind of designated everybody on the team as like, hey, you're like 5% security engineer, and you're going to start taking these little bits of work that are doled out to you by our security architect, who's kind of running the show and kind of doling out the work and figuring out, making sure that we know that we're doing the right things. So this takes us to phase 3. So we said we were moving earlier in the life cycle. So what we did is we had the security architect sit with the product owner every couple weeks, and what they would do is they would groom the backlog. So the backlog, if you remember, is stories that haven't been taken in yet. Stuff that's prioritized that we're going to build eventually, and will get taken into sprints as you go. So the security architect sits there with the product owner. They groom, starting from the top of the prioritized backlog down, however well they feel is about 1 sprint's worth, or maybe a little bit more, maybe 1.5 sprints worth, because things get shuffled. And they would just do the same thing as they had previously done post-planning. Go through, look at the story. What is this? Does it have a security impact? What would that security impact be? What tasks should I add onto this so that when we build it, we should make sure that we carry out from a security perspective. And we would create those subtasks and attach them to the story at that time. So now, when the Scrum team goes into their planning session, they're taking in stories that have already been groomed and prioritized from a feature perspective, and also groomed and subtasked from a security perspective. So now the amount of work you're taking in is known, the amount of work that's going to impact the security team is known, and we're actually doing things according to Scrum rules. So that was a good improvement for us. So now you have, coming out of a sprint planning meeting, you've got each of these stories. Some of them have security tasks, some of them don't. And then individual developers are interacting with individual security engineers to work on that particular consult or that review, and then eventually you get to your product improvement. I would say 3. So that takes us to about like 2 years ago. What was good? Well, we were at a more influential point to inject security. We were better involved in design discussions. We had a more accurate view of the sizing and scoping of stories. We had better visibility to tracking, so we had a release board that we could look at and kind of see exactly what the grooming, what came out of grooming. And we started to become scalable finally by distributing the tactical work amongst the team. The bad was that, yes, we did have more people involved, but that creates complexity, and complexity always, it's worth mentioning as a bad. We thought we could do better training at this point, and of the individual dev teams themselves. So we were doing a lot of work for them, but they weren't learning a lot from it, unless they made mistakes, and then they might learn a little bit about that particular thing. But we weren't really putting an effort into training them beyond that. So we thought, well, we should figure out how to do that. And then we were thinking, well, we need to figure out how to incorporate or internalize security testing along with the existing QA testing, which is sort of, depending on your organization, can be kind of a pipe dream, but varying degrees of difficulty. There's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's worth mentioning before we get into what I'm going to call phase 4, which is the current phase. This part's a little bit engineering heavy and less security specific, but it's an important aspect of how we improved our processes, and that's why I included it. So the context here is that a lot of companies don't use their own products very much, or as actively as they ask their customers to use their products, which is kind of silly. And what happens when you do that is you end up lacking empathy for your customers' pain points, and your solutions that you come up with for those pain points may miss the mark because you haven't experienced it yourself, right? You're just listening to how somebody else is having trouble, and you're like, oh, I think I can solve that by, tweaking this UI here. But you haven't tried to use it yourself, so you get it wrong. So we were using our own stuff, but we weren't using it enough. And at the beginning of the year, last year, we said we should do a better job of this. We should put ourselves in our customer shoes in terms of how do we incorporate our stuff into automated workflows. We were doing that, but we weren't doing it that well. So we call this Project Purina. If you haven't figured it out yet, it's pretty obvious, but eat your own dog food, obviously. And so what we focused on was better, more effective use of our APIs and our technology integration to do automated static and dynamic scanning of code, the code that we were building. Scanning is the product that we sell, by the way. I didn't mention that, but that's our business. So, code scanning. Anyway, so here's how we incorporate automated security testing. Before we got into this Project Purina thing, here's what we did. So we get a release candidate ready. Someone would log into Jenkins and kick off a build, or however you kick off builds in Jenkins. We have to build the code slightly differently for our analysis. So they would have to, I don't know, go press a button and kick something. When the build is complete, they would go download the jar or the WAR files from wherever Jenkins, and then they would upload, so log into Vericode's website, upload it, configure the build, run the pre-scan, which checks for dependencies and a bunch of things. That takes a little while, so you'll get a cup of coffee or something. Once pre-scan is complete, then they have to go select the modules that they wanted to scan, because you can do partial scans if you want. They have to click the run button, and then they have to wait, go get some more coffee, or that would vary from 10 minutes to a few hours. And then when the scan completes, they would go log in again to the platform. They'd have to log in because, of course, they'd be timed out by then, and they'd view the results manually and kind of click through them. And then if there were issues that needed to be fixed, go manually create, Jira tickets, and it was ugly. So that's at least 3 or 4 steps that required manual intervention, and more importantly, they introduced a lot of latency. So over the period of a few months, what we did was we replaced every single one of those manual steps with automation using various plugins and APIs. And you'd think that we would have been using those all along, except that not all of them actually existed when we started doing this. So today we use a Jenkins plugin to interface with the APIs, perform the upload, configuration, and scan, kick off automatically with a single click. Developers don't have to log into the website anymore to view results. We have a Jira plugin which actually pulls down all the bugs that we find automatically into Jira, right alongside all the other bugs they're working on, labels them with security and a CWE label, but basically they're just bugs, and bugs are bugs, security bugs are bugs. We only import the things that they're required to fix by virtue of the policies that we've set, so why import something you're not going to fix? They have to fix most stuff, but so now that just happens, and the security work that they have to do just shows up alongside all the other stuff that can be prioritized along with the features. We can say that something is critical in the same way that we could before, except now it's just there. Another thing that we improved during this phase was we started heavily using a feature of our platform called sandboxing, which is like, it lets a developer run a scan in isolation. It's kind of like open book test in a way. So they're not doing it officially. It's not, the rest of the team doesn't see it. Only they see it, so they can find issues earlier on. They can fix them, and not have any anxiety around, what are the scans going to find when I check this in? What's going to show up in the release candidate? Which, I guess gives them a level of comfort. The good thing from our perspective, from a security perspective, is now things are getting fixed earlier and earlier in the dev cycle as they're doing the sandbox approach. So when we get to the release candidate, there's actually fewer bugs to fix. We're finding stuff earlier, we're fixing stuff earlier, and many, manual steps are now replaced with automated steps. And ultimately, we're able to do this much more efficiently, which is important as you work towards, a CI/CD sort of model, which we're not at today. We're doing, a couple week sprints, but eventually, you want to be releasing more and more often. So automation was key there. So, yeah, question. That's great. So the question is, from sandbox perspective, is it that we're not capturing metrics about it? Yeah, so flaws that we find there are only developer can see those and they can fix them, and that way the business doesn't have to see them. And, we think that's fair. I mean, if they can fix it beforehand, like why do they need to be dinged for that? Not that they get dinged anyway, but that it gives them a level of comfort. Like developers really like the sandboxing. They do. Okay, so the last phase that we're in now, and this is kind of 2014. So how do we scale this thing? How do we, how do we take what we're doing in our team and like make other people do that so that we can focus on more strategic long-term things? How do we build security experts within the organization? And, our team hasn't grown at the same rate that the company's grown or at the rate that the engineering organization has grown. So our team was starting to get a little bit stretched. We realized at this point that the culture was right to scale security expertise beyond the team. And what we thought was, all right, let's find some volunteers on each team to be like a security, we didn't have a name yet, but we said security ambassador, security champion, someone who is a developer that wants to learn more about security, add that to their resume, take some additional accountability, learn some skills, and just, they're interested in doing it. So there were no prereqs to volunteering other than you had to have an interest in the topic, and we were asking you for maybe a couple extra hours a week, no more than that, like specifically limited to that, because we wanted people to actually raise their hands and sign up. So the goals of this program initially were, number one, of course, scale the SDLC by embedding security into each team rather than having it be an externality, having it be on the security research team, which is not embedded. Having those people be the conscience, the security conscience. So as they're working in their stand-ups or working with their teams, to be thinking kind of all the time, what would Chris think about this? Or what would Ryan think about this? Because we're not always there. And it's good to have somebody asking those questions all the time. The program would provide opportunities for collaboration between research and engineering on new security initiatives. And it would encourage the teaching and learning aspect that I said before was underrepresented. So it would give us more opportunity to teach security skills as part of company culture. So this is not the sort of thing that you just show up to work and send an email out about and say, hey, we're doing this now. We spent a while socializing the concept with every single engineering manager and engineering lead. Because we're going to be asking for their time, the developer's time, right? You don't just take 2 hours of someone's time per week and not let the engineering managers know. So we socialize it with, the VPs and the tech leads and a lot of people. And then we put out an email asking for volunteers and describe what we were asking for. I had a bet with one of the development leads because I said, we're going to have a lot of trouble. People are not going to sign up for this. This is going to be really tough. And he's like, no, everyone's going to sign up for this. He was right. We had about somewhere between 15 and 20 people sign up, which far exceeded expectations. We took all of them because why not? It's good to have a little redundancy, especially because Scrum teams, as I mentioned, can reform all the time. They can, so just because you have one person per team, if they decide to move to a different team, now you're kind of out of balance. So we took them all. First quarter goal was exposure to our world, like, hey, here's what we do with security people. And just some general education. So we sent them all to a local security conference. It was pretty cheap. Kind of immersed them in the world, have them attend some technical talks, just kind of hear about attack and defense and the types of issues that we deal with. We didn't give them any particular agenda. We just said go to stuff that sounds interesting, come back, and we're all going to convene, and everyone's going to do a 5-minute version of your favorite talk. So that was a good way to kick it off and have people internalize at least the content of one talk and then come back and share that. So that was fun. Then we also said, all right, security champion, you're attending every security grooming meeting that we do. So you don't have to do anything yet. Just show up, listen to the security architect, talk to the product owner, listen to the questions that they're asking, the things that they're focusing on. What is it that makes it so that you have to do a design review? What are those things? What are those criteria, those triggers? So they just would need to listen. And then the other thing that we did to kind of keep people engaged in a way that was not too much of a commitment was we set up some drop-in times each week where we just have kind of a communal kitchen. So we said, hey, it started out just twice a week for like 2 hours, just drop-in time. Come whenever you want. We're going to work on public CTFs as a group. So there were a lot of them, it turned out, not just at conferences, but at the time there was one called Hacky Easter. It was in April. And there were just like 30 different challenges that you could do, very short, just as CTFs tend to be, ranging from AppSec to network security to reversing to crypto, whatever you want. So not just web apps. The point is, they could come for 2 hours, they could come for 30 minutes, they could come twice a week or not at all. No commitment and no prerequisite learning from 1 week to the next. But they could come down, they could sit there, work with their peers, have a couple security people to ask questions to as they struggled, and it went really well. We had a lot of people show up to those. Interestingly, not just the security champions, but just like other random people from the company would just start showing up to these. We have a whole services team that is kind of the front customer-facing arm of the company. And we have some of them show up. Sales engineers show up, analysts. It's really fun. So it's not huge high volume every time, but we have some regulars, but some people just drop in for 30 minutes, and that's exactly what it was designed to be. So that's been a lot more popular than I think we ever thought it would be. Then in Q3 and Q4, we gave them actual goals. We gave them things that they actually needed to do, and we worked with their managers to actually goal them with that in terms of their annual review. So they had their normal engineering goals, and then they had a security champion goal. And as we're going through the annual performance review process now, they're actually being measured against that, whether they achieved those. So that's cool. And again, that had to be socialized with the managers to allow that. In Q3, they were tasked with taking over just the cooking and the typing of creating the security subtasks that we associated with each story. So now they weren't just listening; they were the one that actually had to listen and create the JIRA stuff. We still had the research person there as a safety blanket in case they didn't know all the answers, which they didn't. But they were the ones getting kind of the muscle memory of how to do this and when to do it. By the end of Q4, we wanted to set them loose on the grooming themselves, so they would be able to do all the security grooming meetings without the security person in the room at all. And the way they were able to do that was we asked each of them to go back and look at all the security subtasks over the past year and look for the patterns. Why did these 18 stories need code reviews? Oh, well, here's the common thread. And we asked them to do that because it was different for every team that we worked with. There's no generic list. I can't give you a list that says here are the things that you would look for during grooming because it's very specific to the product. So we asked them to do that. They all came up with a checklist, and now, with the exception of I think one team, they're all security champions are doing their own grooming, and we can focus on other things. So that's pretty cool. That's where we are kind of at this point. We're in the process of building goals for them for the coming year, which are going to include things like ramping up on doing some of the review work themselves. The code reviews can, to some extent, be turned into checklists if they understand a little bit of context. Basically working on some of the tasks that we would typically do with our guidance, with the end goal being let's turn over a lot of that stuff to them by the end of the year. And we haven't set those quarterly milestones yet, but we're in the process of doing that. The thing that I thought was interesting, I just wrote a note here. If you remember back in September, there was this announcement at Microsoft saying that they were basically disbanding trustworthy computing, and everybody just had connection over that because of the way that it was being reported. And really what it was, if you think about it, is they just said, we're going to take this group of people, which was previously a centralized team, and we're going to push the expertise down into the various product teams, which sounds very much like security champions, except for the fact that you're taking existing security experts and you're pushing them down as opposed to taking developers and growing them into security experts. But the idea that you have that embedded security expertise on the team is, to me, what it sounds like they're doing. So I thought that was interesting because as we were going through this exercise during the year, they kind of were having the same epiphany, I guess. And I don't know if that was because of Scrum or it was just because of a move to more frequent releases, but it was interesting nonetheless. All right, so we'll do challenges in the future and stuff like that. So there have been a lot of challenges along the way. This hasn't been completely rosy. I mean, I've compressed about several years worth now into 40 minutes. At the beginning, it was really difficult to get some of the newer Scrum teams, especially, to take the process seriously. We're a security company, but we're also still, a company full of engineers that don't always come from security backgrounds. So you'd think it would be maybe easy, but it's not. They're not used to that. So that was a little tough. Early on, there was some rogue development work, and by rogue I don't mean malicious. I just mean sometimes developers would take it upon themselves to do work that wasn't that hadn't been taken into the sprint. Basically, they're overachieving. They're raiding the backlog and doing stuff before it was meant to be done, and that was pretty cool. Except that we didn't have any visibility into it, and so we couldn't review it. So we didn't know that was happening. We're a lot better at that now. And there's kind of an ongoing battle between Scrum rigor and pragmatism. So what I mean by that is you're not supposed to, in a real world, in a perfect world, you're supposed to have people fully committed to the Scrum teams. We can't afford to do that. I can't put a security expert on each of 15 different Scrum teams, which is why we're building the security champions. But initially, we didn't have that, and we got a little bit of pushback saying like, hey, you should fully commit to this. You should be a member of this team. We're like, great, I would be happy to put somebody on your team if you want to give me that rec. And nobody gave me the rec. So we had to ask for some flexibility in doing that, and we got through it. Without getting too much into this because of time, Kanban teams, some teams decided they wanted to work in Kanban and for Scrum. That creates a whole set of problems on its own because it doesn't have this sort of structure that Scrum does. And in particular, this particular team was a sort of a product sustaining or maintenance team. So it has higher turnover, and assigning a security champion to that is harder because the point is you work on this particular team for a little while, and then you kind of advance onto a more product-focused team. So this is a challenge we haven't really gotten through yet. So first, we're moving towards continuous deployment. We want to be able to deploy more often than monthly, which is what we do now. I don't think it's ever going to be 50 deploys a day. We're not Etsy, nor do we need to be, right? We'll look at the sort of things that those companies do, and we'll learn from them. But I think our customers expect a level of security rigor from us that's very different from what they would expect from a consumer-specific site. But there's a lot of lessons that we have to learn from there, and we are going to speed up, so we have to figure out how to do that. This year, as we get security champions rolled out, we're going to be building more security libraries internally, so not just code review guidelines, but hey, if you want to do crypto, here's a library to use. Here's the Veracode-specific encoding libraries for these various situations that correspond to user IDs or whatever the case may be for our particular product. And so that will also make it easier for the security champions to take on the code review work because they can just check if they're using something that's approved or not. It's not going to completely take away the dependence on a strong security team, but I think that the checklist style approach gives you a really solid baseline that you can start from. That may cover 80%, and then you escalate to the more seasoned experts for the remainder of it. This is yet to be seen. So we'll see how that goes. That's kind of where we are right now. And by my clock, I have 12 minutes, but by your clock, you gave me a 5-minute sign like 2 minutes ago. So what's the deal? So I thought, do we not have till 4? Oh, okay. Well, good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few questions. Okay. I'll take a few questions, and then I'll wrap up at the end, so I have some conclusion slides with the actual takeaways. But Let me take a few minutes of questions now. Yep. Yeah, that was you.
Any tips on methodologies for projects of implementing risk management?
So questions on incorporating InfoSec risk management into Scrum. I would say that the extent that we do that, I mean, things are happening at a very tactical level. So we're doing like lightweight threat modeling for individual stories and things like that. But if you talk about actual real business risk management, that doesn't come into the day-to-day so much. I mean, I don't know. That may vary from place to place, but we're focused more on what are the individual stories we're building, what are the security risks inherent with that, and what do we need to threat model, but not sort of like leveling up the InfoSec risk. Yep. So as we transition responsibility from the security team to the security champions who took ownership of basically of misses, right? We still take ownership of that. We have accountability for that, and we do some sampling. So even though they're the ones doing it, we'll go and we'll look at the backlog and we'll kind of just take a quick glance to see if we see if they missed anything. Also, they know that if they have a question on something, to not just make a guess. I mean, escalate. Just for us, it's just like make a phone call or send an email and escalate it to us, and we'll help answer that. So there's not we're not setting them out there with no safety net. But yeah, we all share accountability. I mean, that's kind of part of Scrum anyway. It's like share accountability for everything. So yeah, we still hold it that. We haven't completely let it go. Yeah.
What the goal champions and with the evaluation? You or their manager?
So their manager is the one that signs. Who set the goals and who's responsible for evaluation? So we set the goals. We communicate to the managers to make sure that they felt it was reasonable. And then as we've gone through evaluation process this year, which we do in January, those managers have reached back out to me and the person running product security to ask, has this person fulfilled these goals? So it's just, we can say yes or no, we can give them additional insight. So we're evaluating them, but the manager is the one that kind of selects the value from the top down and goes in the review. The manager didn't.
Replacing some stuff with other stuff.
Was the manager at? So the manager was. We wrote an email saying like, here's the Q3 goal and here's the Q4 goal. Can you please put this into success factors for your people that are doing this? And they did it. So they didn't take anything away. They just added that goal.
You didn't take anything away.
No, because it's a small. I mean, it's a couple-hour commitment a week. It's not. It wasn't a big deal. They felt it was reasonable. They wouldn't have done it if they said no. We can't ask people to do this. Like that's when we socialized it so heavily. They were okay with it. Yep, one more there.
You mentioned the integration of automatic scans and ticket creation. How did you handle false positives? That's always a tricky one.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you automatically create tickets, how do you handle false positives? We handle it the same way that we did before. If the developer felt there was a false positive, they would raise it. They'd type something in there, and they would tag me or tag somebody on my team, say, hey, what do you think about this? I think it's assuming untrusted data when it's actually trusted. They would do the same thing. They were just doing it in a different place. They were doing it in Jira where they do all their other work, as opposed to doing it in our analysis platform. So same process, just different tool. All right, I'm going to wrap up with some conclusions and takeaways here, and then we'll be done. So I didn't know the mix that was going to be in the room. So I do this talk for security people, and I've also done it for completely development audiences, and I give them different advice at the end because obviously it's a different audience. Because I didn't know what the mix was going to be here, you get both. So you get the developer advice on this side, you get the security person's advice on this side. And if you're kind of a mixture, then you take both. So developers, let's start with security people. Learn the development tools and processes. Don't add another system for them to use. Like if they use Jira, use Jira. If they use Rally, use Rally. If they use whatever, like figure out how to do your stuff in the confines of what they're already using. And from a development standpoint, help them. Like, they don't know your tools. If they have a question about, is it possible to, do a label thing here, or how can we do a dashboard? Help them do that so that you can not have to learn more tools. It's in everybody's best interest. Take the existing stuff you have, the existing way you do things, and augment wherever you can. For developers, view security as quality. Sort of take a risk-based approach. Not everything is critical, which is sort of the same thing that I say to security people, which is security bugs are just bugs. Some of them can be high priority, but they're just bugs, and you can treat them as bugs. And be reasonable. Not everything is critical. Don't throw a fit for every little thing. It's not going to help you gain credibility with the dev team that you're working with. If you're a developer and you don't understand what's going on, ask lots of questions. Expect the security team to be super responsive about everything. And make sure they understand why. I mean, Agile is not always second nature to security people, so they need to understand, we do things quickly. We expect quick responses. We can't be blocked, that sort of thing. And for security teams, communicate, just over-communicate. Communicate way more than you need to. Be insanely responsive to developer needs, even though that seems maybe hard. But as you're trying to build support for bringing security into something, and it's inevitably going to be viewed as more work, be really responsive, be over-communicative. That really works well. Trust me, learn the hard way. Developers, be flexible. We talked about the battle between Scrum rigor and pragmatism. Accept the fact that you may not be able to have somebody embedded on your team, and try to be understanding of that. And from a security perspective, have a little empathy. Understand that how developers work and why they work and how they're motivated. Understanding the Scrum process really well helps with that. But just put yourself in their shoes for a little bit. And as you're asking them to do stuff, just remember, just have empathy. I can't emphasize that enough. Developers, remember that you're on the same team. You work for the same company, presumably, as the security team. They're not there to get in the way. They don't like being the bad guy. They just want to ship secure products. Assume that everything is a conversation, that you should understand why they're telling you to fix something. If you don't understand, ask. Learn a little bit about the security vocabulary, understand what happens when a SQL injection is exploited, understand the impact. And then for security people, don't just say no to everything. Figure out how to say yes. It's your job not to shut things down, but it's your job to help the dev teams innovate in a secure way. So don't strengthen that perception that security is just there to get in the way. Raise above that, do what you can to help them go fast. They care about security, but they also care about scalability and maintainability and usability and performance and deadlines and other things. And the last one is just the same for both. If you go back to the main tenets of Scrum, it's always be evaluating what you're doing and finding ways to get better. So customize the approach. Nobody's going to be able to go back and take even our most recent phase of what we're doing here and apply it to your companies. You're going to have to customize that to specific teams and the products that they're building. But always be evaluating, always be trying to figure out what you can do better, and how you customize that to how your organization works is going to be important. So Scrum is all about constant reevaluation. So that's it. I hope you take away from this that security can work alongside Agile, can be done pretty effectively, and build a partnership. Whichever side you're on, build a partnership. Remember you're on the same team, and hopefully that way security doesn't get left behind. Thank you.